change your mind, change your habits, change your life.
The future of medicine, by the way, will be energy medicine. What we're doing is using those energies in a manipulative way, and then the only way that you could truly be a true physician was if you went through their organization, which they had just made, called the American Medical Association, and then they made their own schools, and they paid for their own schools so that they could sell their drugs.
I start to think, is there some merit to this idea that some people are just NPCs and there isn't a soul in there and it's all part of the experience and evolution of consciousness? I don't know. Welcome to another episode of Unplugged with Taylor, where we discuss 5D concepts to help you thrive in a 3D world. Today, we are here with Dr. Dane Erickson. Dr. Erickson is a holistic physician, and he also holds a degree in theology. Dr. Erickson, thank you so much for being here. I am so excited about this conversation. For one, I think it's really important to combat misinformation about public health. Yeah. But also, I'm excited to do some theorizing about the metaphysical with you as well.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah.
What do you want to talk about?
Oh, everything. Maybe start with what made you so passionate about holistic wellness, like starting with your experiences in the healthcare system.
Okay. So as a kid, I was always very interested. I was very curious, right? Which I think is just as a concept. I think that as our society, within a society, I think the most undervalued trait is curiosity.
Yes.
Because if we were just simply curious about things, we wouldn't fight and bicker so much. We wouldn't be so unkind. We would learn more. We would just be better people if we were just more curious. And so I find myself blessed to have such a strong sense of curiosity. And so I really loved science and medicine and things like that. Amongst, heck, when I was a kid, I loved dinosaurs. You know what I mean? Like, I loved everything. But going through, talk about some of my experiences with health, I had some mishaps through my life that were treated, yet again, by the best intending people, my parents, those doctors, so on and so forth, but incorrectly. And they maimed me, they screwed me up in different ways, and then I've been, spending a lifetime trying to fix them. And what's neat about that is that in that learning process, it's only allowed me to treat my patients better because I've learned more going through it. So yet again, depends on how you look at everything, but every curse is a blessing. Every blessing can be a curse. It just depends on how
Duality.
you mindset. Yeah, precisely. Yeah. So had that happen. We'll make the chronology short. I went to college and was going to be pre-med, and then I got some good advice that basically said, Dane, you don't know who the hell you are or what the world has to offer, and that's so true. I think that's so incredibly true, and it hit home for me of, I'm 18. I don't even know. I have no idea who I am. I don't know what I like or what I don't like. I don't know who I want to be because I haven't had enough experiences to give me a truly clear conceptual
context.
Context, a conceptual lens with which to see all of it. Right.
How important in medicine? I
had my own vision. Right. I'd like this very narrowed view. I think you're right. Yeah. Within medicine, I think it's a huge thing to think about. So anyway, point being is, I got that advice, and then I said, oh, well, to hell with it. I'll just do what I want to do as opposed to that. Because really, I got to the point where I thought, okay, well, I'll just kind of live through my 20s and try to experience the world and all of that. So instead of dropping out of college, I switched over to theological philosophy. And that was a hell of an experience, too.
I bet. That sounds amazing.
No pun intended, right? Or maybe a little bit of one intended. But, it was great. It was great because, yet again, it taught me how to think.
Yeah.
Yeah, it allowed me to be able to, there's some quote of somebody that says something along the lines of the most intelligent people can, or the true sign of intelligence is to be able to entertain an idea without, diving all into it.
Curiosity.
Right? Yeah, it's curiosity yet again. Yeah, and so it allowed me to practice curiosity. and in doing so, practice sides of empathy and kindness and understanding. I got really into etymology and languages and how the use of language and how it changes your psychology. It changes the way that you conceive the world. It changes your perception. It changes the lens that you see the world. Which we can talk forever about that. We can do a whole podcast just on that. Because I ended up doing a lot of traveling and learning different languages and whatnot too. And that, like I said, that really helped change that perception as well. So I went through college doing that. Kind of used that. I did refugee and asylee resettlement and worked with different organizations using some of the skills that I built by getting that degree. Later on, I got 29, and I was like, "Oh crap! I got to do something with my life." I can't just keep running around. And so I went back and became Dr. Dane, and that process is something we can go deep into as well, because it was I wanted to go on the MD path until I realized what it is that MDs actually do. They're extremely good at emergency medicine. They're miraculously good at emergency medicine. Pardon my French, but they're absolute shit at chronic disease. And the fact is that over 90% of our doctor's visits are chronic disease. So hence why we're the sickest nation in the world, is that we use allopathic care for issues that have been derived by lifestyle and diet and so on and so forth. And so then you're putting a piece of duct tape over top your check engine light by taking a medication, which is only allowing the disease to fester. And here we are. Right.
Yeah, exactly. So at what point did you take a turn in your career path? Because you were like, I want to actually help people be well and get well. I don't want to just do triage work.
Well, it was before I even got into and went to traditional medical school. It was right before that. I shadowed a couple doctors. I started thinking about things. I started doing research. I started figuring all this stuff out. And there was a sudden realization where it was an oh shit moment of, oh, well, now what do I do? I thought that was what I wanted to do. I thought this was the end all be all. I thought that was, I had a picture in my head of doctors, nurses, the whole allopathic side fixing people. And I wanted to be a fixer. We can get deep into this, masculine, feminine, this and that, blah, blah, blah. But as a masculine man, I like to fix shit. I like to produce things. I like to be productive. I like to go in. I like to say, look at that barn. I built that barn. Look at that. Hey, do you see that wall right there? Well, no. You do you see the hole that's in it? No, because I fixed it, right? And I look at that wall every time and I say I fixed that wall, right? There's some part of me that likes to go in, and it's actually, there's part of it that's a very, very altruistic part too. I love, even more so than just building something, I love building something that's useful, right? Love building something that helps somebody else, and selfishly, that makes me feel good.
I think there are so many parallels to what you're saying in like in the education system. My experiences in the education system. I like to see problems and actually do something about them to fix them.
Amen.
And if a system is not allowing me to do what actually needs to be done, and they're telling me, no, you have to go and do this instead, frustration, anger, frustration. Yeah. And I'm leaving, I have not looked back. And I love kids so much. I'm so passionate about trauma-informed care, about social-emotional learning. Yeah. But I just finally admitted to myself that the system in which I was working was not going to allow me to do what needed to be done. And in a lot of ways is working is in complete opposite of my values. Yeah. And even like in a conversation with a colleague who's a former colleague, I should say, who's a really good friend of mine this morning, he's telling me stuff and I could just feel the rage coming back because I'm like, why? Yeah. And I'm like, see, this is why I left. Well, so I really resonate with that.
But you have a passion for it, right? And it's something that, yet again, it's something that you want to do and would love to do. But yet again, there are roadblocks. There are things in your way. That was when I found, so I went to chiropractic school to be a DC because they are PCPs, right, primary care providers and so on. They have the same amount of schooling as a medical doctor. It's just the schooling is just different. They're very similar but different. We're focused more on anatomy, physiology, things like that, learning how the body works as opposed to the chemicals and what we put in the body to change them, right? So I found the chiropractic paradigm before, and I'd never really been to a chiropractor, didn't really experience all that stuff. I didn't really know that all too well. I just saw the paradigm. The paradigm is this, and that is that the body is trying to function. It's trying to function, but there's an impediment. There's something in the way. If you remove the impediments, it will function, right, the way that it's supposed to. Now, that being said, it's because, a very small if you look at the, like, if you ask Dr. Google, how many of our diseases are genetic, it'll say something like 40% have a genetic component, but we're talking about epigenetics at that point. So those are genes that can be turned on or off. That's completely different than genetic. Genetic is, this is written, nothing can change this. And that's like less than 1%. And we know what those are. Those are cerebral palsy and Down syndrome and things like that. You can't change those, right? They're going to be there. Everything else is changeable. Everything else is fixable, including the biggest killers, which we can go into that too. The biggest killers in the United States. Do you know what the 3 biggest killers are? I'm going to put you on the spot.
Yeah, okay, let's see. One of them is heart disease, correct?
That's number 1. Nailed it. Yeah.
And then cancer.
Number 2 is easy. Yep, you got it. Cancer. What's number 3? What's the 3 biggest killers in the United States?
Oh gosh, it's not diabetes, is it?
So it would be if we were talking about just diseases. But the 3rd biggest killer in the United States is modern medicine. And in fact, it's in the rest of the world now. It's something that people don't know, don't realize, don't really think about. And yet again, this is something that hit me big where it's like, I can't do that. I can't follow standard of care, which is leading to the 3rd most deaths.
Unpack that.
Of where that's coming from and how that works.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these are everything from medical errors to being prescribed a medication that you would take, but the medication you have an allergy to, or it gives you a side effect that gives you a disease that kills you, or something along those lines. And so it's all of the above, a botched surgery or a surgery that, went the way it was supposed to, but this and that XYZ happened sort of thing. Yeah.
And really, in reality, it all starts with we are natural beings. Everything we ever needed to survive and thrive is already here, natural in the earth, and we've gotten so far away from that. The
farther we get from it, the sicker we get, right? The more, and yet again, it goes back to that chiropractic paradigm of that there's something that's getting in the way of the way that we're supposed to function naturally, right? And what can that be? Well, I mean, it can be the electronics, right? They're literally right in front of me, so I'm going to jump into that one. It can be electronics, it can be EMFs, things like that. Obviously, the ubiquitous set of toxins and chemicals that are in our systems now, air, water, food, soil, you name it. The microbiome is huge. Like, that's something that is just, yet again, modern medicine just completely ignores the microbiome. The
more I learn, and you have been doing this work and you know a lot more than I do about some of the specifics, but even like one of the things that...
Maybe not, I don't know. We're going to find out.
One of the things that I have gotten really particular about is meat. I don't want to eat the trauma meat.
Yeah.
The way that we're...
You eat a sick animal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or an animal that was slaughtered in a certain way, an animal that was like chickens being raised in dark barns so that they become essentially
shoulder
depressed
to shoulder,
and eat all the time, so they get, and they're fed something that we're not supposed to be eating or consuming that much of. It's it's disturbing.
The old adage, you are what you eat, is more true than what people think so, because the other way you can look at it is this. It's not... So we think of like hormones as chemical messengers, but the fact is that every chemical is a messenger. Every chemical is telling our body to do one thing or do the other thing, and that's when we get into this epigenetics and whatnot too. But the food that you eat... Okay, let's go metaphysical. To some extent, but I mean, honestly, it's where the metaphysical and science overlap. What we once called magic, turns into science fiction, which then turns into science. That kind of thing. Everything has an energy, but what is energy?
everything.
Well, it is, yeah, but technically, what is energy?
Particles.
It's particles, and it's the movement of those particles, aka right energy. But what do we call those particles? Chemicals, right? Those are molecules that we've labeled, and we call them chemicals. So these like for instance, this. The future of medicine, by the way, will be energy medicine. It will be frequencies and energies that change this 100%. I'm fine being quoted on that, because here's the idea: if I give you zinc to help with your immune system, to help, let's say, fight off a virus or something like that, what does that zinc do? Well, the zinc, it's absorbed through the gut, it goes into your system, or however, sublingually, and it gets into your system, and then it goes into your cells. And once it moves through and into your cells, there are chemical reactions. I won't go deep into this, but there are chemical reactions that are taking place that are stopping. Like, it does more than this, but let's just say it's a viral thing, right? So then you've got a virus, and it's going to stop the creation of the RNA or DNA that virus is then making, right? So what it does is it sort of puts a block on that enzymatic process. But how does it do that? Through what we would call energy. It's a transfer. So go back to chemistry. Can you go way back to chemistry? Do you remember?
Yes.
Do you remember in chemistry where you would have the proton neutron thing right in the middle, and then you had those circles on the outside, and you had to balance one to the other.
The negative and the positive.
So you have a negative, positive, right? You got one that has more electrons, one that doesn't have enough electrons. This one would then transfer these electrons over to this one.
Okay, to cancel them out or to
balance.
Balance.
You got it, absolutely. And so everything's looking for homeostasis, including our entire body, right? So this is the micro of the macro.
That's my favorite thing to talk about.
Everything's looking for homeostasis. Everything's looking for balance. It truly is, right? What's happening, though, is that this chemical, we're just going to say that this zinc is a 2+ ion. Well, it is, right? Kind of like calcium and things like that. So then it's got these 2+, these 2 extra, and then it's going to send those over to this other one, boom, to help balance that out. And when you're doing that transference, what is that? It's a transfer of energy. So all we're doing right now in modern medicine, including what I do with minerals and herbs and all that other stuff, is a transfer of energies. And what we're doing is using those energies in a manipulative way to try to force something one way or the other, right? That's what we're doing in modern medicine. With me, it's more about what do I give you to help balance it, right? And so we're using things that are less invasive and less strong, but that more support the body in its natural processes as opposed to force the body. Now, your arm's chopped off and you need to reattach it or something like that. That's where modern medicine is amazing, right? You're having a heart attack and you're dying, your stroke, whatever it is. That's where those really invasive interactions are miraculous and amazing. That's the time and place, right? I hate this idiom, but it's the right dog for the fight.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's the one that you want to do at that point. But there's so many other things that are leading to that. So many things that lead up to that, typically, right? We'll not talk about like a car accident. We'll talk about something like a heart attack or a stroke or whatever. How many things did you do? I mean, how did you build up to that point where you're going to have a stroke? You did so many things. No offense, but
Yeah.
you did so many things that led you to that point. That stroke began 30 years ago by you eating fast food every other day.
And that kind of speaks to what you were saying about people, this idea that things are genetic.
Yeah.
Like, I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, oh, anxiety, it runs in my family. Depression, it runs in my family. I had this.
Then stop the cycle.
Yeah, that's not, it's like as if we have no power.
Precisely.
And it's completely uncontrollable. One of the things that I think that maybe pushed me over the edge in the education system was a preschool teacher telling me, and I'll just say it, it's not like I'm going to say her name or anything, but she's telling me about a student who was, he was always up and he wasn't following directions. Imagine a 4-year-old can't sit still for hours at a time.
Crazy talk.
And she was like, he probably just has ADHD. His brother's in kindergarten and he has ADHD. I was like, wow. I was like, well, what do you know about his family? What do you know about his home life? And she was like, oh, single mom. She's got 5 kids. And I was like, yeah, ADHD. That darn.
Well, why do you think people like to give those labels?
I think that it's easy, and there's an easy. So when you can,
It's an easy out.
give some sort of specific label, then you're like, oh, it just needs a prescription, and
You
then
got
it'll
it.
be fine.
Yeah.
Whereas what you were talking about requires individualized attention
Amen.
to a patient,
Yeah.
which I think it goes without saying why our healthcare system has gotten so far away from that. When you get into like insurance companies and money and for profit and all of those things means like quick. Prescriptive, things that you like, protocols.
Standard of care is what it's called.
Ah,
and that
there
was
you go.
why I didn't become an MD, is because of standard of care. Your hands are tied. So let's talk about that real quick, if you don't mind.
No, I'd love to.
So modern medicine, right, an allopathic physician is tied to this. And that is where a patient comes in with symptoms. Those symptoms get a label, AKA a diagnosis, right? And all that is a label of symptoms. I'll say that again. A diagnosis isn't what's wrong with you. It is a label for your symptoms. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It does.
So a bunch of people can have the same symptoms or similar symptoms, get the same diagnosis, but have different problems.
Yeah.
But what they're going to do is they're going to give you this. You're going to go back to the setup is symptoms, label, aka diagnosis, and then you go to the Merck manual, aka the pharmaceutical Bible. And what all that says is it gets these medications, because these medications do what? Well, they poison a different part of the body so that there's a dysfunction in that gear that messes with the gears where you are already having the dysfunction that makes those gears work better. So, for instance, you said heart disease, right? That's low-hanging fruit. So you got high blood pressure. Okay, so what if I were a medical doctor? I would give you a medication that poisons your kidneys, which regulates blood pressure. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So now you're poisoning your kidneys, which changes your blood pressure.
Which is why when you listen to a commercial, which is, if you think about it, pretty dystopian that we have commercials for prescription medicines.
Hopefully that's going to change soon.
At the end with really upbeat music going on, they're like potential side effects, and it's like 10 different things as a result.
Anal leakage. Death.
Like, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, so much better, right? But yeah, that's the way that works.
Standardization.
And that's the standard of care. And if you don't follow that, you're now up for malpractice. Yeah. Right? Because you're not doing what is right for the patient that has been deemed by the insurance companies and the AMA and all of that sort of stuff.
And that's probably the way they negate liability and all of those things.
You got it,
It's
right?
very similar in the education system. As over 15 years, I've seen them get more and more prescriptive to the point where standardized.
Yeah.
With tests, everything is centered around standardized testing, but also like curriculums. So large corporations come up with these curriculums that'll help early intervention for reading or whatever, what have you, which that's, again, gets into
we
money.
don't want a nation of thinkers. We want a nation of workers.
Yes.
So they say, right? And that around that same time of Ford and all of that sort of stuff, that was when Rockefeller designed the AMA, right? We can touch on that very quickly. I don't want to go deep into that, but we can touch on it just for, yet again, the sake of this argument, so you can understand that too, so that your listeners can understand that. Is it? So Rockefeller was pretty pissed off because they broke up Standard Oil. And so now he need to find different ways of going about it. He was quoted as saying basically he's going to screw over the United States. I think he truly did that by creating the Fed, along with some of his lackeys. But a great book is The Creature from Jekyll Island. Amazing book, by the way. If you want to know everything about the Fed and how it was created and what it's doing to the United States, read that. But on the other side of it, he also created pharmaceuticals, essentially. And to this extent, he made them big. He hired a guy named Flexner. Flexner did a report. That report showed that holistic physicians were "quote unquote" quacks. So it was all just made up. And then the only way that you could truly be a true physician was if you went through their organization, which they had just made, called the American Medical Association. And then they made their own schools, and they paid for their own schools so that they could sell their drugs. Right.
Wow.
So that's how this happened. And then all of the holistic physicians got put in jail and fined and all this sort of stuff because they weren't practicing "quote unquote" medicine anymore, which they just coined the term medicine. It used to all be medicine. including plant medicines and,
Yeah.
and chiropractic medicine and homeopathic medicine and naturopathic medicine, all of the right, traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, right? All of them by which we're holistic.
Yeah.
Until we get to allopathic medicine, which is reductionistic. Looking at, if you got a problem with your knee, where do they look? They look at your knee. But where could the problem of the knee be coming from? Your ankle, your foot, your hip, your low back, all those different things, right? But they look at your knee. Why? Because that's how they're taught to look at these things. Same with your gut, same with your stomach, same with your head. You got a headache, where do they look? They look at your head. Where do 9 out of 10 headaches come from? The neck. Yeah, they never look at your neck. They always look at your head, right? And they'll give you medication for your head. See how this works?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I didn't go down that path.
It's so interesting to listen and think about the parallels. I mean, but it's
with schooling.
Yeah.
It is.
The more and more standardized it gets, teachers coming out and in like some coaching roles, and I also do some adjunct work. They don't even know how to think for themselves because they're reading from a script. You don't need a credentialed professional to read from a script.
That's a doctor. That's a doctor, right? A medical doctor. Yeah. And I didn't want to be that guy because that's not who I am. So that was why I didn't go down that path. This is what I do that's different, right? So if a patient comes into me, instead of taking their symptoms and giving them a label, a diagnosis of this, right? I go upstream. So that was the downstream approach. The upstream approach is I'm going to figure out, okay, what can cause these symptoms? What in your life can cause these symptoms? Is it a toxicity, a deficiency, a hypersensitivity? Is it a trauma? Is it a thought? What is it that's happening? Is it a disconnect from X, Y, or Z? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Let's get into the nitty-gritty and figure out what is this. And I'm going to test for that. I don't guess. I test. I'm going to test for these things. I'm going to figure out what is the root of your issue, the actual cause of the problem. And if we uproot it there, downstream everything functions the way that it's supposed to. Crazy talk, right?
Right?
Yeah. Now, it's more work on my end and it's more work on the patient's end. But I think that we're a society that's gone into standards of like protocols, right? That are just like that it's a one size fits all.
Yes.
Right. And that is so far from the truth. You know, you are your own ecosystem. You know, and everybody is. And so we get into microbiome, we talk about the energies that you have, right? And everything that you've absorbed in your entire life. If you want to get all woo-woo and whatnot, we can talk about it as diet, right? Your diet, AKA your environment, everything that you intake from your mom and dad yelling at you or loving you, right? To the air you breathe and the water you drink.
Absorbing the energy of the people that you surround yourself with.
Precisely.
Even, I had a conversation with someone about even like talking about your, if you trace back like your genealogy or your origin, which we all have a little bit, most of us have a mixture or whatever, of your homeland, your roots, where your ancestors were, traveling back there. Everything in a certain area was like naturally grown and adapted to the people in that area.
Yes.
So we were actually talking about like plant medicines and how there's so much value in traveling back to the land of your ancestors and using the medicines in that land because they're going to be uniquely suited for your biological makeup.
So we can even see that with diet to some extent too, that people who are more equatorial do better with plants and people who are less equatorial do better with meats.
Huh.
Right. And it just makes sense for seasons and, growing seasons, even to the extent of people who are in more northern climates or further southern climates do better with tubers and whatnot too, because they needed those they stayed better. They worked out better. It's crazy that. But the other part of that being, I want to go off of your point because I really love that we used to have rites of passage. Right? We used to have points where we would integrate. We would learn the boundaries of who we are and who we are not, right? What the world is and what the world is not. We used to do those sorts of things. We did them with plant medicines. We did them with all sorts of different rituals, if you will. When I say integrate, I mean that we have a PQ, an EQ, an IQ, and an SQ, right? A spiritual quotient, intelligence, emotional, and physical, right? So these are the legs of the stool that I like to look at as a holistic physician. I believe that the spiritual is all-encompassing or all-foundational, however you want to talk about it, right? It is the whole piece. But within it, if you haven't taken care of your physical health, everything will struggle. If you haven't taken care of your intelligence, right? If you don't take care of that curiosity, if you don't engage, you don't learn more, you don't grow, you don't change, then you're going to be stagnant. And a stagnant pond grows algae, but a flowing river, right, never does. And same with the emotional quotient. If you don't spend time recognizing and understanding your emotions, well, we all know what that leads to, right?
Exactly.
But I think that once you need to learn to integrate all of those, you need to spend time working on all of those and fixing all of those. The crazy thing about it is this, though, and this is the fun part, is that the PQ, the EQ, and the IQ all take a Jocko Willink style, David Goggins style energy. Like the more you try and the more you do and the more you push through, the better off you're going to be, right? Spiritual side is all about letting go.
Wait.
And it's the fact that you were born whole, you'll leave whole.
Everything you need is here. Everything that is meant for you is coming to you.
Everything that you take on is actually excess weight that you don't need, right? To the extent that I often say that true healing is more about letting go than it is about adding in.
It's
right?
Unlearning.
It's unlearning.
Because we're already whole. We're already very powerful beings, and we already have access to everything that we need to know. Yeah. It's the conditioning that has made us think differently, which goes back to the power of our thoughts and how they are. It is your reality, which is why manifestation is such an interesting concept to me.
Well, let's break down manifestation in almost a scientific way, right? We can talk about how the way that we perceive the world and the things that we think. Okay, so when you have a thought, it is a conceptualization of stimuli in your environment, right? And then you have a perception of that: good, bad, ugly, left, right, up, down, whatever it might be. Yeah, and then that becomes an electrical response in your brain and your nervous system, which then is sent throughout your body as a chemical signal, aka hormones. And those hormones then become a cellular response in your body. And this is how a thought can make you sick or well.
Like a thought can create a cortisol release.
Precisely.
Stress.
That's a great example. That's the easiest example.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, it's perfect. I love it. It can do that. Or it can create an oxytocin release, right? It depends on the thought and the feeling that you're having, right? But your thoughts create your feelings. And so the way that you think about things creates that, right? But then what is that chemical response? Yet again, we already talked about chemicals being exchange of energies, right? So it creates an energetic state of your body. Are you vibrating at this state or this state, that whatever, right?
Frequency,
right? And we know that frequencies either attract or repel, right, depending on different frequencies and this and that, blah, 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 right? So that's that. And so we're thinking we're thinking about micro to more macro, right? And then we're talking about as a whole, right? And so if somebody ever says that manifestation is bullshit, there's the science.
Scientifically proven.
Right. Now, to what extent and how does it work and this and that, blah, 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 well, we're still working on that. But we know that there's a basis. So now we can do what's called the scientific method, right? We can start actually looking into this in a scientific way, which, by the way, I don't know if people really realize this, but the church was actually the one who really, I mean, you can look at like Descartes and stuff like that, who really started doing scientific method stuff, but like the church was the one who really got into the scientific method. And you know why?
You told me, and now I'm trying to. It was to prove the religious concepts.
Yes. It's the idea of this: God created the world, and the world was good, right? And so, therefore, philosophically, we can say if this thing is good, knowing more of it, being deeper into it, right, and being deeper into God's creation is only going to behoove us. Yeah. Why should we not? Why should we not know more about God's creation? Let's break it down. Let's get into it. Let's figure this shit out, right? And that's what the church started doing, big time. We can talk. I mean, you can go into the church and all the bad things they did and whatnot too. But this is a good thing, the way they really got into all of that. And so my point being is that yet again, these people who are naysayers in this, not so much duality, but dichotomy of like you're either scientific or you're religious.
Yes.
No. In fact, including Einstein, most of the best thinkers in the entire world believed in God, and they went through lapses of agnosticism and atheism and this and that, blah, blah, but eventually we're like, holy shit, like this is too, yeah. There's too much to believe in, to not believe in a Tao, a God, or whatever you want to call this. Something. Yeah. And then it's really just a point of getting in verbiage.
Yeah, whatever you want to call it. And at some point, I think that there was this where suddenly it's a he, and it's a white guy with a six-pack of abs and brown hair and blue eyes.
So they anthropomorphized God in many religions in order to make it more relatable. That's all it is. They give gods...
Say it louder for the people in the back.
Yeah, they give gods names and places and this stuff like that because and sexes and hair and all of that. I mean, and Hinduism does it. I mean, like they all do. They all have these people-like creatures that they call God or gods, and the idea is the same. Is that in the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu says that. And I'm paraphrasing, that for any word that he uses to describe the Tao, he gets further from the Tao, right? And the reason is because it's so, yet again, if you want to get in like Christian words, omnipotent and omniscient and
the human brain can't fully conceptualize what it is, and there is no word in our language to fully describe it.
Yeah, and that's the reason that you get into like Hebrew and they say, well, what is the true name of God? Right? That's where Yahweh comes from. It's just I am, right? It just
Great
is. Exactly. And so then you get into that concept of it just being, and then that's where we get into the if you just are, you are sitting in the presence of God. And so that was the reason I wrote my thesis when I was in school on silence, which I wrote like 52 pages on silence, which is the most
which is amazing,
ironic, right? Yeah. And I spent 3.5 months, something like that, silent, and it was. I get goosebumps and I kind of tear up every time I think about it because it was maybe one of the best times in my life.
Were you in a like with monks or?
So I did go to some monasteries and whatnot, but I was with family for some time and friends and whatnot. But what was great about it was that I would just sit there, and it was like constantly meditating. Which, by the way, I do want to share this too. Meditation is not the lack of thought. It is the observance of thought.
It's the observance of thought.
Yeah. And if you truly take time to separate your true self from your thoughts, and then your thoughts create your emotions, right? And your emotions are part that you feel within the body. So if you can separate yourself from your body, so the EQ, the IQ, and the PQ, right? If you can separate yourself, the SQ, from those, and just truly observe, that's true meditation. But if you're physically silent for months on end, you get to a point where you're just in a state of constant meditation. So I can see where these monks were coming from, and I actually considered being a monk when I got out of school because I was like, that was the happiest I've ever been. I want more of that.
What started to happen with your thoughts? Like, did you really did there become more and more separateness from it to the point where you were just completely an observer of everything and that you didn't attach to thoughts at all?
So non-attachment, that's a huge part, massive part. I'm glad you said that. That's where okay. Did I get anywhere near close to enlightenment or nirvana or anything like that? Probably not, no, right? But, I mean, I was 22 at the time or something like that. I don't know how old I was, but young, dumb, and all that. But I had enough of an experience of that it was enlightening to some extent, you know what I mean? And to answer your question, the experience has stuck with me in the sense of non-attachment. And so what was happening was that I'd watch things go down. And even if I was part of it, I didn't feel as though I was part of it. You know what I mean?
I've been trying to explain this concept to people, and I think of it like being an observer of my thoughts, even if I'm not, necessarily sitting there meditating, which that's what allows you to do it, get better and better at it.
Right.
But being like, ooh, I'm angry. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
It's almost like a shadow integration because you can learn about what's back there in the subconscious when you become an observer of your thoughts. And then you're not going to don't shame the thoughts, but bring it to the forefront and understand it better so that you can integrate all parts of your shadow self is how I think about it.
Perfect. So this is something that I even talk to patients about all the time. And that is awareness triggers patterns, right? So the first thing to fix anything is awareness. Right? You have to be aware of the problem before you can ever fix it, right? How do you become aware of it? Well, separate, right? Observe it, see it, don't judge it. Right? This is meditation in general, right? But if you can do this constantly within a state, your constant state, I mean, that's amazing. So observe it, be aware of it. Once you're aware of these things, which by the way, I believe that the overwhelming majority of problems that we have in our society are because of a lack of awareness. And yet again, if you had true curiosity, you would have awareness as well.
I was going to say, that's not as common. That's a lot more difficult for a lot of people than you would think. And I'm constantly wondering why.
I lack of curiosity.
Because
I believe.
I'm like what you said, just like everything. Why? Why does it work? Why?
Yeah.
I'm like a truth seeker,
yes,
if you will.
Well, and we can get metaphysical on that too, because I believe that God is capital T truth. God is the reality. And we have such a, like we were talking about earlier, we have such a, well, before we turn the cameras on, right? Before that we have such a limited perception of this, whatever the hell this is, right? That our views, our judgment on what reality is so it doesn't matter.
It's subjective for
it's so subjective.
30 people in a room observe the same situation. You have 30 different versions of reality. So there are very, like you were saying, there are very few capital T universal truths.
Yes.
A lot of subjective truths.
Yeah, and it's just but our perception is so small that how can we even say that our version is the truth? And it's just I believe that God is that truth. Period. Right? And that truth is beyond our understanding.
And that's humbling. It means relinquishing control, which I think a lot of people don't feel comfortable with.
But knowing that you live within that truth is comforting. Right?
I think so.
Yeah. But yeah, awareness, and that goes into also, the never attribute to maliciousness what you can attribute to ignorance. Because most people are just ignorant. So if somebody cuts you off and while you're driving, they probably aren't meaning to cut you off. And even if they did, then why did they do that? Well, it's probably not you. It's probably something going, all these different things. They don't even know why they're doing it. They're just angry at the world. But why are they angry at the world? They don't know why, because they haven't taken time to be aware of all these things.
And that's that non-attachment, not internalizing other people's.
You got it. Which, by the way, here's a fun fact for you. Do you know why road rage is so prevalent?
I would love to hear the answer to that.
Well, if you think about it, we're in a steel box going, 70 miles an hour, or hell, even 40 miles an hour. It doesn't matter. Your nervous system is on edge. Period. Whether you feel comfortable or not, you're just used to it. But you're on edge, and so any little insult to the system, right, is going to throw you over that edge. And then that's when people break and scream and yell and do all the things they do, is because we already have a heightened sense of danger. There's already higher cortisol levels as you're driving.
Is that because we're not biologically meant to travel at speeds that fast?
Yeah, exactly. It's all of the above.
Wow.
Yeah. That we know it's dangerous.
It's not natural. Again, not natural.
It's unnatural. It's dangerous, and therefore our system goes I would say it goes into a state of. I mean, it's regulating the way that it's supposed to, but it's sort of a state of dysregulation in the sense that it's, cortisol and all the above. And
that happens to me every time I step on a plane, but then I look around and people are asleep.
Yeah.
My nervous system is like, even I tried 3 melatonin and it was like, nope, not sleeping on the plane.
That's right. I'm right there with you. that gets into a whole other personal thing of control and
Being
trapped and all of that. Yeah,
I've talked to you about.
Yeah. Did we talk about that?
You're the first person that ever told me. You're like, yeah, I think that's called agoraphobia. I was like, there's a name for that.
Yeah, it's called agoraphobia. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's you can get agoraphobia, claustrophobia, and different things like that. But yeah, it's just anyway. But yeah, point being though is that people will find you have to find the awareness, right? And how do you find the awareness? Through things like meditation, curiosity, observance, non-attachment, all the above, right? That's step one. That's the hardest. That's the biggest. If you simply become aware, now you have a choice on how to react, right? And respond. Let's put it that way, as opposed to react. And then once you're aware, you can notice your triggers. You can be aware of them, like you were saying. I'm angry right now. Why the hell am I angry? What caused this? Where is this coming from? What she did was not that big of a deal. Why would I be? Oh, because my mom said that one that time to me. Blah blah blah. Right? Are
you in my head?
Yeah,
that's literally me on a daily basis walking through my thoughts.
But it's most people. You know, I mean, that's part of the human condition. And then the other thing being patterns. So those triggers will create the patterns that we live in our life, and that we are destined, as it were, to continue those cycles, to continue those patterns until we choose to break them, until we can see the pattern and choose to break it.
Where do you think ego comes into play in that, when in the preventing the awareness and preventing because there's this, I feel like the ego is what's like, no, you're not the problem. Everybody else is the problem. And that can be hard in a lot of people. I mean, self-awareness is not the norm. I hate to say that, but...
Well, ego is a protection mechanism. And I think that's where a lot of this comes into, is that it's this battle between the secular and the sacred, right? It's the battle between the PQ, the EQ, the IQ, and then the SQ. And the SQ is on its own. The SQ says, you're fine, let it go, blah, blah, and all that sort of stuff. Even to the extent of, even if you die, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. The IQ, the EQ, and the PQ says, don't die.
Yeah.
Right? It's also to the extent that our brain's not made to make us happy. It is made to keep us alive. Yeah. And so we learn these mechanisms of protection. And I think the ego is part of that. That the ego is part of the I, as opposed to the maybe royal we, right? That is the universe.
We are all connected. We are all one. We're all consciousness.
Yeah. So it's the duality part that you were mentioning in the very beginning.
The ego likes separation.
It does. It does. It likes that individualism. And I think to some extent both are necessary. And
in a 3D world?
Yes, exactly. In a 3D world, both are necessary. And yet again, so it's not about killing the ego. It's about befriending the ego, understanding the ego, saying it's the friend that has the trauma and all that sort of stuff that you got to be kind of nice to and whatever. Maybe give us some tough love though too, right?
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
absolutely.
Like absolutely, give us some tough love where it's like, dude, no. Back off, right? Set proper boundaries for the ego and say, no, we're going to operate within this framework. And that it's a compromise on both ends. It's a compromise on the spiritual end, because the spiritual end says, go be a monk and sit there and do nothing, right? And meditate all day and blah, blah, blah.
And don't care about anything and reconnect with everything else and collect.
And just sit in God's presence, period. And then the ego is the other part that lives in the world and wants to go off and make podcasts and teach kids and all of the above, right? That's the thing that wants to build barns. It wants to produce. It wants to do things. It wants to help people. It wants to connect with other people and other things to some extent, right? It wants to connect with the self, right? It wants to do all these other things. So and it does it for what reasons and all of that. That's where it gets really convoluted of why is it doing it? How is it doing it? But I think that you can almost separate the secular and the sacred by saying that the ego is the part of the secular. But then the true wisdom is when you come to find that it's all one. And that sounds super woo-woo.
No, I love it. But that's what I like to call shadow work, shadow integration. Is that not labeling anything as bad or good, or the more you try to shame some part of yourself, the harder it's going to hold on, because it's all parts and it's integrating and bringing all to the surface awareness and just acceptance of all that is.
Precisely. And a good example of that would be you respond in an arrogant or egotistical way, or in a way of anger, or this and that, blah, 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 right? You respond in this negative way to this thing. The way that you integrate that is to figure out why you do that, right? It's that process. Become aware of it, right? Figure out why you do that. So notice the trigger, become aware of these things, figure out where that pattern's coming from, understand it, and this is where they talk about like inner child work and stuff like that, where you do whatever you need to do, which we can talk about all those things, but that's probably yet again a different podcast, where you then accept it for what it was and understand why it came about and say, look, I understand why you did that. I get it, man. I don't blame you. It makes perfect sense. Let's not do it anymore.
Yeah.
Now that we know better, let's not do that anymore.
Yeah.
But that's all it is. And you can talk to yourself in that way if you need to.
I do.
Good. Well, I think more people need to. You know, I mean, I think some people don't talk to themselves enough in the sense of what we're talking about. And I think that other people talk to themselves in such a negative, terrible way.
Yeah, and that was the big thing for me.
Was it?
Realizing that we live in a society that relies heavily on fear and shame-based conditioning, because those are very powerful conditioners and also very easy ones, rather than making people feel a part of something bigger than themselves and helping them understand the purpose and how your actions impact you and others, and connectedness can be your own guide, in terms of your ethics and values and right and wrong and what have you. But instead,
but that's an uncontrollable person, though.
What do you mean?
So, like Hawkins scale. Yeah.
Okay.
So you put somebody down on the lower end of the Hawkins scale of shame, guilt.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. You can't control someone if they understand the inner workings of everything, but you can control someone who you've instilled the concept of shame and guilt in them, which are not real things.
Right. Right. So you put that. You get them to vibrate that at that level. You get them to live
low frequency,
to live in that state of being, and they're controllable at that point, right? And they'll always be looking for a way out, a way up. And you can give them little. You
can be the one that gives them a new title with a little bit of
all these little things that bump their ego.
Yeah.
Right, wow. They could bump their ego too, and by bumping the ego, you're keeping them in that state, and you're not allowing them to rise up and go into a higher state. And I think that's a big part of. I mean, we can get deep into that too, but
that's breaking out of the matrix, right?
Yeah, so that's where I was going with it, though. I mean, that's exactly what it is, right? That's Celestine prophecy. That's every. It's every movie that you've seen is the hero overcoming those feelings of, like I said, guilt or shame or whatever it might be. We can go into all of that, but that's the hero's journey, is moving from the bottom to the top and going through that whole process.
I have this theory that, like, all of the powers that be, like, whatever you want to assign that as, government or world leaders or whatever organizations are actually running the world. I know there's all kinds of theories on that.
Sure.
They know all of this stuff. They know all the labeled so-called woo-woo stuff.
Sure.
And energy and how everything works. But by taking it and discrediting, like you said, that information, and then feeding everything through their systems and teaching people to disregard their own body and own inner sense of knowing and only rely on the information that they're fed,
yes,
keeps people in power and
reliant,
other people disempowered.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, absolutely. And I think that it would be, personally, I think it would be a mistake to stop there at power, because I don't think it has to do with power necessarily. I think it has to do with, yet again, I think it goes back to more of a childlike, egotistical sort of thing where they feel safe in this position as opposed to unsafe in the other position. Does that make sense?
Yeah, without control.
Yes. Yeah. So I think so I think that a lot of people stop at a certain thing. They say it's just about the money. No. It's more than money. People have tons of money. They want power. No, but why do they want power, right? So keep asking why. Let's keep going down that curiosity, rabbit hole. Why do people want power? They just want to feel safe.
And
right?
power gives them a sense of safety.
It does, right? Yeah. I get that. I understand that. Is it the right way? Is it the good way to go about it? I don't think so, because I think that they are stuck in the IQ, maybe, right? Maybe even the PQ to some extent, but they're not listening to the EQ and definitely not the SQ. They've completely disconnected from themselves from the SQ. Anybody who has a sense of power and uses that power to reign over others and control others and so on and so forth has completely lost connection with the SQ.
So this is me like getting way out there and just theorizing for a moment. Let me just give that disclaimer. But do you think some of the most powerful people in the world that do abuse power, that they don't, I know I'm going to use the word contract, whatever it is. Do you think they maybe have some sort of soul contract with all of us to create, they have the power to create systems or things that impact thousands, millions of people? And which, everything that happens here on Earth is meant to evolve consciousness in a certain way. Yeah. So it's like, that's interesting to think about the people that yield enough power here in the 3D to cause destruction or harm to millions of people.
Well, I would say that's like saying, if I may, and I could be off on this, but I would say that to some extent you're saying that they're evil. Are you moving in that direction or no?
No.
Okay.
No, but it's like they're here. It's just like when you think about the concept of, your narcissistic dad or mom or whatever, and you have a contract.
Oh, I see what you mean.
At the soul level, that you're here to play these roles and evolve one another in very specific ways.
I see what you mean.
So what does that look like, if you were to subscribe to that? And again, all of these are just models because our human brains can't fully conceptualize it. But if you were to subscribe to that, what does that look like for people that have the ability to cause harm to millions of people?
Elaborate more.
Like, a world leader or, corruption in the FDA, for instance. Yeah. Like those people, they're impacting the health and well-being of millions of people. People are losing loved ones because of them. Their lives are getting cut short.
Because they let a drug go by that should never have gone by.
What I guess just from a 5D lens, I just wonder why is that? Or is it, I told you before, I thought it was interesting. I read something about how not every person here on Earth necessarily has a soul. Some of them are just NPCs. Yeah.
Right. And so to that, and that's where I was wondering if you were going to.
Because does a person have a soul if they would do something like that?
So here's the way that I would take it though too, is that, and this gets really, really woo woo because we'll go into dimensional realities, and that is that there's a possibility. I've heard this explanation before, and it's something that I don't ascribe to, but it's something that I definitely consider when I think about something that, like when someone poses a question like you do. Is it possible that everyone in my reality is an NPC? And that everyone in your reality is an NPC to you? You see where I'm going with this? Where every dimension exists independently, yet not independently, to the extent that we can't quite understand how that would look.
Which would align with subjective reality based on every single person.
And that's exactly where I was going with that. Yes, precisely. That every person, when you when you observe reality, that reality changes, and it depends on the way that you observe reality and when and how, right? That changes everything. And so then it's like, okay. Because then it goes to the whole if a tree falls in the woods, does it make a noise? Well, the slit experiment would tell us no, it doesn't, or that the noise would be different at the very least. And
based on the observer, right?
Based on the observer or non-observer. Yeah, you're familiar with the slit experiment. I mean, for your listeners, basically, they had these photons. They shot them through a piece of metal, and then they had a backing on the other side, and the piece of metal had, I'm going to make it up, it was something like 3 slits in it. And so when people were watching it, there were the photons would go in these 3 slits pattern, And then when they walked away and nobody else was observing it, there would be 5 patterns coming on the back of it, which shows that simply us observing something, this is Schrodinger's cat. Schrodinger's cat is there's a cat in the box, and is the cat in the box or not in the box when you can't see the cat and everything is kind of the tree falling in the wood and a whole deal like that stuff too. But what it's doing is it's talking about quantum physics and the way that we shape our own reality. And to bring it back, what you're talking about is that each subjective reality for each person might be a completely different dimension for each one of those people. That's a possibility. That's not quite an answer to your question, because what are those people doing? I don't know. I really can't tell you. I can't imagine. Personally, me knowing what I know, I can't imagine living a life like they do. But let me answer it in a different way, though, and I'll finish my tangent. Because this gets into another thing that I like to talk about that I like people to consider, which is because what you're kind of talking about is choices and free will and whatnot too, to some extent.
Yeah.
And I'll connect it in a second. Because determinism makes a lot of sense to most people, and that is that if I were you, Taylor, I would be you. I would be you. I would be exactly like you.
Based on everything I've done and experienced, you'd make the same choices.
Because you thought you made the right choices in every single situation because of what happened to you previously, because of whatever was ingrained in your brain before, and so on. Yeah. So what we're doing here is we're saying there's a point at which so there's that. And that means that every destiny is set, determinism is set, there's no changing it, period. The issue is that does free will exist in that sense? And the point being is that it does, depending on how you view every single tribulation that you hit. If you view that terrible experience as a roadblock that is going to stop you for the rest of your life, that is your choice. Your other choice could be, I'm going to use this to propel me, and I'm going to do better from here on out, and so on and so forth. So it's growth versus stopping. It's victor versus victim mindsets, yeah? And so when I look at it, I look at it in 2 different ways. Number one, I think you have a choice of growth or non-growth. I think you have a choice of being spiritually connected or disconnected, being aware or being unaware, right? All of these, I think, are the same thing. And I think that somebody who has made it to the point where they have a position where they are hurting tens of thousands, if not millions of people, hundreds of thousands of people on a regular basis by the decisions they're making, and they know that and they're okay living with that and whatnot. I think you have to take into account all the things I just said.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not a direct answer, but I think that I would say it's extremely complicated to talk about that. And then you can talk about those decisions and whether or not they're good or bad, and
how they bypass or tell themselves lies and create a new story or script or narrative in their mind. What about like serial killers though? I mean, what story are they telling themselves? That it's everybody else? I mean, I guess I just really get curious. And again, this is just like fun theorizing, obviously, but I just get curious about souls. And if there is a soul in there in every person, like, how do some people do the things that they do? Because I inherently believe that inherently all people are good.
Yeah.
But then when you get into some things, like, I start to think, is there some merit to this idea that some people are just NPCs and there isn't a soul in there and it's all part of the experience and evolution of consciousness? I don't know.
I would say I don't think so. I think that everybody does have a soul.
You think so?
I think so. Yeah. I don't think there is actually an NPC. I think that that's the reason I brought up the thing I said earlier, is I think that that's the one that makes the most sense to me. But at the same time, I think that there's a lot to be said about learning. Well, I mean, why do you here's a question for you. Why do you think we're here? Why do you think that this exists, that we come here and that this happens?
I think that we come here, it's like a school where we learn and evolve. I guess what kind of gets me wondering, and you could get into like, what do you think? What about a 7-year-old that dies early and their parents are left
The 1-year-old that
devastated.
gets leukemia and dies.
And that could go back to contracts and a soul agreeing to evolve this person by playing this role. And if you look at across lifetimes, what have you. But then I also came across something talking about how some really deep, jarring experiences impact us on a soul level, and we carry that on a soul level. So to think about someone who has, like Jeffrey Dahmer, when he sheds his conditioning and crosses over, what is that? Is his soul just like, oops? Like, that's just, I don't know. It's just crazy to think that some things that people have done that once they cross over in their higher true self. But then again, the idea that before someone dies traumatically, your soul leaves. So it's not actually you experiencing that traumatic death. I don't know.
Oh, I'd never heard that before.
Which gives me peace, because I'm like, how far are we going with to me, I liked that. I took a lot of like solace in that. The idea that like some of the horrors that we witness, that you're on a soul level, someone isn't there to experience that.
Yeah, I never heard that. It sounds nice.
It does. I like it. It's something that I was like, I would like to believe that.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Me too. Yeah, I try not to. I try not to think too much about the afterlife.
Yeah.
Because I can't do anything really about it, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of like the kingdom of God is inside you and all around you, not in mansions of wood and stone. Lift a stone and I am there. Split a piece of wood and you will find me. Right? To the extent of like, I'm going to create heaven here on and now
with your frequency.
Yeah, precisely, exactly. And I believe that frequency is the thing that will continue on. It'll continue on through the universe, through the people I've touched, through this world, secular, sacred, or together as a whole. And I think that is all I can do. And then anything beyond that is beyond my power, and therefore fun to think about and fun to talk about. Absolutely, 100%. But I try not to think about it too much, because there's so many other things that require my attention. And
we're here to do something.
I think so. I think so. I think that something is to put it in the terms that we've been talking, bring that vibration to the highest level possible. And how do you do it? Well, through some of the tools that we just talked about and some other tools and whatnot too. Foods that have high frequencies, people that have higher frequencies. Just to keep taking the next step up, keep taking the next step forward as far as you can go. And you do that through, like I said, really hard and diligent work, discipline, right? Which by the way, I'll just say this quickly. If you want freedom, it's on the other side of discipline. If you want meaning, purpose, and adventure in your life, take responsibilities, right? This is the PQ, the IQ, and the EQ, or those guys. And then the other side of that, the other side of the same coin is the spiritual side, that SQ. And that is all about letting go, unlearning, deconditioning, and just being. And if you can do this and this, and then put that together, you're going to live a beautiful life.
Dr. Erickson, I just want to say that I think the work that you're doing with your patients is so meaningful, because you are taking these concepts and you're actually meeting people where they are and making it accessible for people who have not, in the world that we live in, learned that that's the traditional approach. Like I was asking you about, when you show the pendulum, that they look at you kind of funny, but you're showing how it works, and therefore making concepts that are for their highest good accessible, which is exactly what my dream and vision for this platform is.
Beautiful.
5D concepts that help you thrive in a 3D world, and taking that what people might have labeled as woo-woo and showing them how it works, why it works, and then how it is serving to them in their highest good.
Yeah. Well, thanks for doing this.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
All right, everyone. See you next time.